For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Motsabi Hwayane. Political analyst Aubrey Matjitni unpacks the ruling ANC's watered-down response to the Nkandla report ahead of the May 7 elections. Despite the public protector's findings that President Zuma personally benefited from the Nkandla upgrades, you suggest that most ANC supporters will not abandon the ruling party. Please elaborate.
Well, there is a difference between the concern ANC supporters have about what is contained in the report and their voting preferences. In fact, the majority of ANC voters do distinguish between the president and the party. Their refrain is that the ANC is not Jacob Zuma and Jacob Zuma is not the ANC, and therefore a vote for the ANC is not a vote for Jacob Zuma. In other words, intuitively or otherwise, ANC voters do understand that we have an electoral system in which direct presidential elections are not a feature, and therefore they intuitively or otherwise do understand that they are voting for the party and not for the president, as a result of which the approval rating for the party will be much higher than the approval rating for the leader.
On the other hand, you suggest the ANC might be planting the seeds of its own demise by continuing to defend President Zuma. What do you mean by this?
Well, I must say I'm quite concerned, I'm quite disappointed by the fact that those who have been speaking in defense of the president have tried to divert our attention from those parts of the report that deal with the president, but have tried to focus our attention only on those parts that deal with the officials. Now, in my view, Rome was not destroyed in a day. And therefore, if the ANC is responding in this manner out of the arrogance of power, it must remember that Rome was not destroyed in a day, and therefore its eventual demise might occur as a gradual process of rising levels of discontent within its support base.
Is Nkandlagate really to be of no electoral consequence? Is it only an obsession of the chattering and middle classes?
Well, it is the ANC that has tried to project concern around the report as a mainstream media and middle class obsession. Ironically, they are correct to dismiss the report as a factor, because I am not persuaded that beyond the mainstream media and the so-called chattering classes and the middle class, the damage that has been caused by this report will extend significantly, and therefore so significantly as to disadvantage the ANC in electoral terms. I do expect the ANC to lose some support in this election, but there is no factor on its own that helps us understand why the ANC loses support, if it indeed will lose support in this election. But one must caution against the dismissiveness of the ANC in relation to the middle class, because the middle class may be small and therefore may not be a decisive factor in this election. But you don't want a middle class that is hostile towards the state, or a middle class that has become disengaged, because given its size suggests that it is therefore very important with regard to state capacity and economic capacity, because skills in the economy and the state are skills that reside in this middle class, and therefore you need a middle class that is part of the democratic project, not a middle class that becomes so discontent that it disengages from the democratic and political process.
You argue that the lack of effective opposition in South Africa means that there are no checks and balances on the Zuma faction that has come to dominate the ANC. Is there nothing then that can hold this faction to account or restrain its power?
Well, in a competitive party system, the alternation of power between a ruling party and other parties is a possibility. Ours is a political reality of single-party dominance, which means in the foreseeable future, you are not going to see this alternation of power between the ANC as a ruling party and another party. And what that does is to rob opposition parties of their role and functions and agents of restraint. You see, if the ANC believed, and there was demonstrable evidence that it would lose an election, its choices and behavior would be totally different.
You say that moral and ethical considerations are not going to be major concerns for ANC voters. What then are ANC voters most concerned with?
You know, we're a highly moralistic society, especially given the fact that most of us profess to be religious. But if you look at the performance of religious-based or religion-based political parties, such as the African Christian Democratic Party, their performance suggests that religious and moral issues are not a key factor in the consideration of voters. And therefore, if opposition parties, in attacking Jacob Zuma, are trying to attack his morality or the lack thereof, in the hope that this attack will disadvantage the ANC in electoral terms, they're making a mistake, because moral issues are not very high in the agenda of voters. I am not suggesting that South African voters do not care about moral issues. I'm convinced that they do. What I'm suggesting is that South African voters, particularly those who are poor, who are working class, whose immediate concern is with regard to their immediate social and economic circumstances, may be concerned about moral issues, but they are more concerned about the immediacy of their economic and social conditions. And that is why issues such as job creation, issues such as poverty, tend to score much higher with them than moral issues.
Thank you, Aubrey. That was political analyst Aubrey Matjiki discussing the Nkandla report findings and how these might dent the ANC's image and allocation of votes.